Assassin's Creed Valhalla doesn't know what story it wants to tell for about 60 of its 80-hour runtime, but finally, as you're getting ready to just give up on the game completely, there is a burst of super interesting ideas. First, we get to see what Valhalla really is, and the answer is quite interesting. A virtual paradise where Vikings hooked themselves up and are eternally part of this sort of battle heaven. It's a cool concept that doesn't get all that much time to cook, because shortly after, you fight Basim and trap him there. The grand follow-up to this is Lila foolishly releasing him and then seeing her take his place, exploring the data world with Digital Desmond, and then Basim being unleashed in the real world because of this. The consequences of both would seem to have rippling effects, to say the least, but the game just sort of sputters out after that. No resolution, and it doesn't seem like Ubisoft cares too much about following up on it in any meaningful way.
Avowed doesn't have the best story in the world by any means, but there is a lot to like about the story, especially as the game hurtles towards its finale. The discovery of the garden, the reveal of the magfolk, and the clear allusion to things that could go down in a sequel are all mighty interesting. Unfortunately, just as you think you're about to set out on one last adventure, there is an awkward, rushed town siege segment to end the game. The boss fight against Inquisitor Lodwyn feels like step one, but in reality, it's the end of the game. Then we get a literal speech about the power of friendship, and that's all she wrote. It makes no sense. We don't get to confront Ada for sending Lodwyn here to begin with, and we get no follow-up on whether or not we sent Yatsley away with an obviously evil sorceress. It's just such a sterile ending that cuts the story short, where it clearly was picking up momentum for literally the only time all game.
Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is an amazing game, but if I had one criticism, it's that it ends far too quickly. The reveals at the end of Act 2 are simply mind-boggling and introduce an enormous amount of new ideas and plot elements. The problem is that almost none of them are followed up on. It's clearly sequel bait looking at it now, but at the time, I wanted some resolution. I wanted to know what was going on with the writers in Clair. I wanted to know what happened outside of the canvas. I didn't just want it, I needed it. And yet, regardless of that, the game shoves you full force towards the finish line right after these revelations happen. There are some meaningful side quests to check out before the final area for sure, but those are optional. In terms of the story, it starts cooking with full heat near the very end of the game and then lets us off without a complete resolution. They have one option: make a sequel or a DLC, because we cannot be left with the questions we have.
Horizon Zero Dawn is an amazing game and has one of the most interesting backstories to discover in all of gaming. However, the main plot is far less interesting. Dealing with the human cult and them praying to Hades was not nearly as intriguing as discovering how the current world came to be. But they do drop one very intriguing tidbit at the very end of the game. That being, Hades is taken by our mentor throughout the game, Silence. This betrayal, as it appears, sets up tons of questions that it seemed like we may be exploring after what I assumed was a fake first ending sequence. Unfortunately, the most intriguing thread in the story is what Silence is even trying to do by possessing Hades, because the cult's obsession with it and the plan to bring all of the old weapons back online wasn't all that interesting compared to the amazing backstory. Silence was easily the best character in the game, and that shocking twist deserved to be the finale of the game rather than just a teaser.
Final Fantasy XVI is a long game, and while the story is kind of all over the place, it does have a lot of intriguing parts, particularly ones that come into play towards the end of the game. The story builds to a thrilling finish, but instead of fighting through an incredible endgame dungeon to a final boss, it's just a big fight against Ultima, and that's all. The plot threads about Leviath and the Lost, the Undying Order, and Ultima's homeland, as well as the black mist covering the land,
are all just left on the cutting room floor. Sure, Leviathan the Lost would be addressed in an underwhelming DLC add-on in 2024, but overall, it was wildly disappointing to not get any follow-up on the story. The Undying in particular were a fascinating idea that seemed to be the real evil at play in the world, and yet they get no elaboration and become little more than a footnote.
Kingdom Come: Deliverance was such an interesting and unique game when it came out in 2017, and while it had some rocky edges, it was a fantastic game that gave the RPG genre a much-needed makeover. While the story was gripping, it simply didn't have an ending. Sometimes that's hyperbole, but here, that was literally the case. The main villain gets away, stealing your sword in the process, and the game ends with Hans and Henry riding away to deliver an important letter to another land. I was so sure that we were about to get a thrilling finale. And then, credits. Seriously? It is the most baffling example of a game ending right as it's getting interesting. Luckily, the sequel picked it up and finished in grandiose fashion, but we had to wait 8 years for that to happen.
The Witcher 2 Assassins of Kings is a fantastic game, and if you've also got The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, then you're golden. However, if you've only got The Witcher 2, you're going to be super disappointed as the game ends, as the story is at its most interesting point. While the game is great, the story more or less meanders for quite a bit as you complete different small quests for each area you're in. Once you've figured out what's going on, and that Letho is nothing more than a pawn for kings fighting in a war, you'll be promptly shown the door. I'm serious, the confrontation with Letho is so bizarre, because you simply choose to let him go after all he's done, and the game doesn't change much regardless. So many pieces slide into place in the final hours, and it seems like something bigger is definitely coming, but Letho shows up and says he's been used, and if you let him go, see you in The Witcher 3. It was a brutal cliffhanger that we had to sit with for 4 years, where it eventually all paid off in the next game.
Deus Ex Mankind Divided is such a great game, and it's a shame that it just wasn't finished. The final boss fight is such a strange and anticlimactic encounter that can be literally skipped by finding an insta-kill button, and then the game just ends. Right as it seems like Jensen was going to uncover the larger conspiracy at play, discover the higher-ups in the Illuminati pulling the strings, and end the corruption once and for all, the credits roll. This might have been sequel bait, but it's a sequel you will sadly never see. And it's brutal because outside of Cyberpunk 2077, this is easily the best sci-fi series, set in a near-future world, and one that I've been following since my formative years. There was a DLC after the fact, but nothing that came close to picking up where the story left off in a meaningful way. And that ending still leaves such a bad taste in your mouth.
I'm bitter, I'll admit it. Dragon Age Inquisition sets up one of the biggest cliffhangers in gaming history and thoroughly falls on its face in delivering the payoff. But before then, we had the ending of Dragon Age Inquisition. It was cooking. The Illuvian, Morrigan, and Flemeth all came into the fold. We got the bombshell of bombshells that Solus is the Dreadwolf and caused the explosion at the beginning of the game, and everything was in place for an unbelievable ending. That ending should have come in Dragon Age Inquisition. For a game that meandered around with its plot for so much of the game, it picks up a meandering few hours, and it's an awesome set of events that just picks up as the game comes to a close, and there are so many interesting beats happening, but it feels so brutal to see it end when it does. It all feels worse when you see where the sequel out with the material. That's a blow I may never recover from.
Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2, The Sith Lords, is one of my favorite RPGs of all time. Now, with that being said, the ending sequence of the game is such an unbelievable tease. We've revealed the true threat in Darth Traya, heard about Revan going to find the true Sith in another form of space, and we're about to touch down on Malachor 5, where it all started for the story, and then it just ends. Malachor 5 is a wildly disappointing final area that speeds us through to the final boss, which is equally underwhelming, and then all that juicy intrigue about Revan and the true Sith? Forget about it. At least that's what Obsidian did. Everything in the game is so good, and the build towards the finale is top-notch as well, but felt like so much more was supposed to come. There was a lot more story to tell in this specific universe, and it just never continued.